four adventurers entered the Bolivian jungle. They aspired to find the Toromona tribe. It was said that this mysterious tribe possessed a lot of gold. But along the way, they had a disagreement. Yossi and Kevin wanted to take the river route to conserve energy. Karel and Marcus preferred the land route, which they believed was safer. To avoid further arguments, they decided to split up. Marcus and Karel went by land, while Yossi and Kevin took a raft down the river. By riding the raft and following the river current, Yossi and Kevin were able to save their energy. However, suddenly the river ahead became extremely rough. Yossi and Kevin tried to control the raft, but the current was too strong and their raft got stuck. Kevin bravely jumped into the river and swam to the shore. Unfortunately, Yossi fell and was swept away by the strong current. Yossi was tossed around in the water. He struggled with all his might to reach the riverbank. Luckily, he managed to grab onto a rock in the middle of the river and used it to hold on. Eventually, Yossi made it to the shore. However, he had been separated far from Kevin. Not long after, Yossi saw his backpack floating away in the current. He immediately jumped into the river to retrieve it. Yossi walked along the riverbank to search for Kevin. But even though he shouted his name, there was no sign of him. Like it or not, Yossi had to survive alone in the middle of the jungle. When night fell, Yossi tried to sleep among the bushes. However, strange noises in the forest made him uneasy. Yossi felt as if he was being watched. The next morning, Yossi continued his search for Kevin. After 2 days without food, every step became heavier. Yossi eventually found a local settlement, but unfortunately, only damaged huts remained. He spent the night alone in the abandoned village. The next day, Yossi continued on his journey. Suddenly, he came across a footprint. He hoped it belonged to Kevin, but after checking, he realized it was his own footprint. This made Yossi very frustrated. It turned out he had been walking in circles all this time, but he had no choice but to keep going. That night, heavy rain poured down. Exhausted and starving, Yossi tried to sleep in the rain. Meanwhile, local villagers found Kevin stranded on the riverbank. They immediately brought him to the nearest settlement. Kevin received care until he recovered. He then reported that his friend Yossi was still missing. Back in the jungle, Yossi continued walking unsteadily. Suddenly, he got trapped in a patch of quicksand. Slowly, he reached for nearby plants to pull himself out. Although he managed to escape the quicksand, his energy was completely drained. That night, Yossi rested by the river. At this point, he could no longer walk. The next morning, Kevin and the local villagers searched for Yossi. But after a full day of searching, they couldn't find him. Just as they were about to return, Yossi suddenly crawled out from behind a rock and stood up with the last of his strength. Yossi had finally been found. At that moment, he was on the brink of life and death. Kevin and the locals immediately brought Yossi back to the village. If you were Yossi, would you be able to survive?